A really warm welcome to everybody in the room and online for the Parliamentary Forum, Securing Prosperous Futures, the vital link between inclusive education and employment. My name is Cecile Sullivan-Elder and I'm the Executive Officer of Family Advocacy and have the privilege of being your MC today. Today's event is being hosted by People with Disabilities Australia and Family Advocacy, with both organisations sharing a strong consensus for the reform across our education system that's needed. But before we launch into the proceedings of the day, I have the pleasure of introducing Daniel McDonald, also known as Deadly Hand Talk. Daniel identifies as a queer First Nation artist. Daniel is a proud Gadigal and Woonarura man, and he'll be doing our Welcome to Country today. Welcome, Daniel.
Hello everybody. My name is Daniel and I hope you all feel welcome today, and thank you for being here, coming to Parliament House. My name is Daniel, also called Deadly Hand Talk. I've got black hair, I'm wearing blue glasses, I've got brown eyes, and I'm wearing a black jacket with gold buttons. Welcome to Gadigal country, and I want to respect all the elders, you know, from the past, now and ongoing. And I just want to respect, and I welcome all of you to Gadigal country. I just would like to tell you a story about what this event is, and I would really like to thank you all. And I would really like to thank the PWDA. So I want to tell you a story about thriving. So many of our disability friends have fallen into a black hole. A lot are still trapped in there and feel that we have been wiped with a heavy sponge. We are not dirty disability sponges for others to use and wipe up with their dirty things. We are taught to be passive and often have no idea about what's happening and no idea what their rules are. Will anybody throw a rope to us? We sit, often alone, in a very dark room. We are afraid. For a long time, we sit still and are quiet, trying not to rock the boat. Nothing ever changes. It is time for us to learn how to thrive. Let us work together to find a way out of this hole. My mind tells me to climb. It's like I am in a circus. We need to develop acrobatic shoulders to get out of this black hole. So build yourself up and find the rope. Drop the rope to us and hope. Hope that the colors outside, healing us into colors, finding a way out, freedom. I can't wipe us off with sponges anymore. Let's squeeze out the sponge water and we can float all the way. Loud, proud, and thriving. I would like to thank all of you and welcome you all to Gadigal country. And I want to remind everybody that after this meeting, please contact with your families and friends before you travel home to make sure that you are safe. And thank you very much.
Don't know what to say about that, Daniel. That was very impactful. A very impactful welcome to country.
So you will unmute it, yes.
I acknowledge many of the 1,000 years of First Nations people and their residing on this soil and the culture and the rich culture that it brings to this country. So thank you for your generous welcome today. A few housekeeping notes for those in the room and for accessibility consideration. We're currently apparently on level 7 and there's a ramp and lift access at the front, as most of you would have come in through, near reception. There's accessibility bathrooms. To get to the accessibility bathrooms, please exit the Jubilee room and to your right, turn left at the fountain or move towards the back of the fountain or the second bathroom. We've also got a map at the reception table at the front with some information around where things are located throughout the building, if anybody is curious to pick that up. In the event of an evacuation, we've got wardens who will guide you to safety. They wear red or yellow tags. Don't get mistaken with this yellow tag. And they will help you proceed to the designated assembly area located at the base of the grass ramps at the corner of Parliament Drive. On your seats, you would have found packs with resources relevant for the day. We've also, as you will see, there's a number of staff scattered from both organisations around the room with yellow lanyards. If you need any assistance, please reach out to the staff to get some further information or support. If you're online, thank you for joining us. We will have some tech support if you've got any issues with access and all the rest of it. There'll be live captioning. And obviously, we thank our Auslan interpreters that are here today that will also be divided up on the screen online for the viewers online. We're joined today by several distinguished guests, some of which I would like to mention. The Disability Discrimination Commissioner, Rosemary Caius, Leslie Tesh, the Parliamentary Secretary for Families and Communities and the Parliamentary Secretary for Disability Inclusion, the Honourable Natasha McLaren-Jones, Shadow Minister for Families and Communities and Shadow Minister for Disability Inclusion, the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, Shadow Minister for Education and Early Learning, and last but not least, Abigail Boyd, Chair of the Parliamentary Education Committee, And a shout out to Abigail and her office for helping us actually get this room set up for this event today. So thanks very much, Abigail. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce Megan Spindler-Smith, who is the Deputy CEO of People with Disabilities Australia. Megan will be saying a few words in opening the event on behalf of PWDA.
So as you heard, I am Megan Spindler-Smith, the Deputy CEO of People with Disability Australia. I'm just going to put my cane here because at some point it will fall down. First of all, I want to say a big thank you to Daniel for welcoming us to Gadigal country. I do acknowledge the traditional custodians of the unceded lands that we are lucky enough to be on right now. And I want to extend my respect to elders both past and present. And as recently I heard from Uncle Graham on Darug country, he taught me to say, don't say sorry, say sovereignty. So I'll just keep saying sovereignty instead. As a privileged disabled person who has experienced only some of the challenges of transitioning through school and education into the workplace, the conversations we have today are important to recognise that those who don't have access to the privilege that I have had need that access. So I want to say thank you to our speakers today, Disability Discrimination Commissioner Rosemary Caius, our political representatives, and most importantly, the young people with disability who are willing and openly sharing their stories with you today. I also want to say a big thank you to our co-host family, Advocacy. It's actually been pretty wonderful trying to find ways that we can learn together and grow together. If you don't know us, PWDA is Australia's peak cross-disability representative organisation, lots of words, and it seeks to advance the rights, health and well-being of people with disability. The UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability guides and informs pretty much everything we do. We are funded to provide that cross-disability, systemic and individual advocacy on behalf of people with disability in New South Wales and under the Department of Community and Justice's Disability Advocacy Futures program. Again, lots of words, people. PWDA is not just for people with disability. We are led by our board, all of whom are people with disability. And many of our staff are also people with disability. Our role is to ensure we not just represent our members and their needs and expectations, but also ensure equity for all people with disability. In 2022, 5.5 million, which is about 21.4% of Australians, had disability, and that has been an increase from 4.4 million. That's a huge increase since 2018. The 2018 figures also show that 16.9% of the New South Wales population had a disability, which is equivalent to, and somebody else wrote this for me, so please note it is correct, 1.346 million and 200 people. So that's a lot of humans. As the Disability Royal Commission highlighted, people with disability continue to experience discrimination and poorer life outcomes across all life domains when compared to those without disability. People with disability, especially those who are multiply marginalised, continue to live below the poverty line. Employment that pays award wages and above award wages is critical to ensure that people with disability have equal access to societal opportunities, community and improved wellbeing. Employment rates are well below those of non-disabled people, having not changed in almost 20 years. And for those of you who are not sure how long that is, that's just under half my life. So now everyone knows how old I potentially am. Desegregated education and employment is imperative to ensure a future where all people with disability are equal members of society. The DRC showed that segregated settings can and do cause significant harm to people with disability. PWDA knows the integration of disability affirming society and community with people with disability requires that an inclusive accessibility first approach to planning and decision making for all environments that we live in. Ableist attitudes are not just challenged, but actively removed from our institutions and communities. And segregated education, employment and housing settings are dismantled, with conceptually mainstream settings being inclusive and disability affirming. An inclusive education system where every student will and preference are co-developed and respected to empower people with disability to have choice and control over their own future. Inclusive school opportunities are core to our futures and to our public schools, because they must provide effective and accessible work experience opportunities for all students with disability, ultimately ensuring an inclusive transition to meaningful careers and employment, just like I got to have. At People with Disability Australia, we always primary the person with disability. However, we recognise that for children and young people with disability, parents, carers and family members are important. They're important advocates as students with disability transition into employment, careers and careers of their choice. Therefore, developing family and carers' capacity to primary the decisions of each young person to express and embed their will and preference is just as important. As the child of educators, both from the public schooling and university environments in New South Wales. In fact, my dad actually worked here in New South Wales Parliament as the head of Parliamentary education for about 15 years. So I literally grew up running around this place and causing trouble. I have been and was beyond privileged to have their expertise in navigating and ensuring my choice in how I transition from school to university to work. My experience should be the norm. But now, 25 years since I left high school, it still isn't. We at PWDA know that social and community inclusion will only succeed if attitudes, including those of our public service and employers, are led by the human rights model of disability, and not the charitable model that focuses on deficit and rescue. A disability affirming community embraces the value of diversity and recognises the value we all bring. Resources to support our co-development and implementation of tools and learning for employers to create disability affirming work environments with opportunities for all people with disability to not only have jobs, but careers and futures of their choice. Change is imperative. We, people with disability, want to have meaningful employment and engage in our communities. Funding for advocacy and co-developed resources to support students to transition from school to meaningful employment must be increased to sustainably meet the demand. PWD is ready to work with our New South Wales government through co-design to build an inclusive and desegregated education and employment action focused roadmap. Thank you.
Thanks, Megan. Such an important moment in time, with PWDA showing leadership as usual in progressing the rights and interests of people with disability. It will be familiar to many people connected to the work undertaken by Family Advocacy that our efforts in working towards securing an education system that supports everyone to learn, develop and grow together has been a long-term aspiration of the organisation. Being seen as and treated as one of the kids, being afforded the same opportunities of other young people, being afforded the opportunities to build a future post-school filled with aspirations of what's possible. The position we hold is backed by many decades of evidence supporting positive educational and social outcomes for both students with disability and their peers without disability, when inclusive education is done well. Although the evidence is clear on this front, this has continued to be an elusive progression for many students with disability. It has also been an elusive decision for our Education Department and Ministers for the Day to grasp. A primary focus of family advocacy is enlisting the advocacy efforts of families, and particularly when their family members are young. Investing in creating high expectations, navigating systems with these expectations, and supporting their family members to be actively engaged in all aspects of everyday life. Education and employment are two key domains that sit within our strategic plan and our focus for change. For many young people and their families connected to our organisation, there are limiting expectations around what is possible for the young person whilst at school and post-school. This is evidenced through various reports recently released, as well as over 4 years of delivering our School to Work project and in connecting with thousands of young people and families across New South Wales. Sadly, many have experienced firsthand the problematic and inconsistent policies and practice around work experience and post-school transitions in New South Wales schools. That is not to say that good practice doesn't exist. However, it's a lucky dip. The data doesn't lie, leaving many families feeling that if their young person with disability is to be afforded the same opportunities as other young people, then intentional efforts required to overcome significant barriers need to be presented to adjust to the system. It is also fair to say that many people are considered unemployable in the open employment market. This is according to the New South Wales education system, leaving whole cohorts of young people out. Does this sound familiar? This assumption of being unemployable is driving many harmful practices across New South Wales schools and stripping potential benefits that can arise through employment roles for whole groups of people in their immediate futures. So this is how we're told that things play out in the local school. Students and families are told that work experience isn't relevant for them. Students are only given opportunities to visit Australian disability enterprises for work experience, and for those that aren't familiar, they're sheltered workshops. Or the option of visiting local day service programs perhaps facilitated by a school bus tour to visit programs around the local area. Students clustered together to do work experience with no meaningful access to identify strengths and interest and employment aspirations. Students even suggested to do placements on the school grounds because it might be safer, and they can get a taste of what happens around the school. Inflexible approaches to consider the support considerations for the person to make it work, to make it a meaningful experience. Often the student is suggested to stay home while the other students within their group cohort participate in work experience. Or assumptions are made that a student may not be suited to a certain line of work. They're assumptions not based on reality, but ableist attitudes. Of no surprise were the findings from the Disability Royal Commission in relation to the harm produced through separating young people and other children in school settings. Either was the evidence that this separation dramatically reduces employment outcomes, both whilst at school and post-school for this cohort of students. And particularly for students educated in separated settings such as support units and special schools. Our system of separation and segregation keeps deep-seated issues of negative stereotypes and attitudes alive and well. This must be seen clearly by now. This is a complex issue. However, in simple terms, our education system is creating a powerful feedback loop that supports the ongoing underemployment of young people with disability, driven by low expectations and othering of this group, with policies and workforce development issues across our schools that keeps this in a holding pattern. Although there's a lot of reform at the national level targeted at supported better employment outcomes for people with disability, which is a good thing, there is much of this responsibility that sits with New South Wales Government. There is a lot that we can do. It is clear that these reform agendas also need to work together for any kind of change that's going to be meaningful to be realised. We find ourselves at an important junction in time, backed by findings and recommendations of 4 comprehensive reports, all released in the last 12 months. Namely, the Disability Royal Commission recommendations, the NDIS Review final report, the New South Wales Legislative Council Education Inquiry Report, the Audit Office of New South Wales report. These combined reports give our government of the day everything they need to take decisive action. Not 1, but 4. I would now like to warmly welcome the Australian Disability Commissioner, Rosemary Chaos, to her keynote address. Previous to the Commissioner's appointment earlier this year, she held senior academic roles within the Faculty of Law and Social Policy Research Centre at the University of New South Wales. With a long and impressive history in the progression of disability rights, the Commissioner was one of the drafters of the United Nations Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disability, serving her second term on the UN Committee as Vice Chair, awarded a Human Rights Medal in 2019 in recognition of outstanding contribution to the promotion and protection of human rights. Please warmly welcome Commissioner Rosemary Chaos.
Don't mind me, I'm normally a lot smoother than this, but I broke my leg in June and it's taken me a while to get it bent completely again. And I just know I'm going to stop soon. So I'll just take my time, fall in the power plug hole. Right up. Yeah, and my least favourite piece of furniture in a room is a podium. There's the old academic. Well, hi, everybody. As Bill just told you, I'm Rosemary Kays, and I'd really like to thank Daniel for that very powerful welcome to country. Thank you very much. I'd also like to acknowledge the people of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation as the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathering, and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. I'd also like to thank the organisers.
We can see.
Yeah, well, it's not going to help if I can't see my notes. Yeah, sorry. Tricky point, that. Look at the picture. I don't change much. A few more white hairs. I'd also like to thank the organisers for inviting me to participate in the forum today. The right to inclusive education for people with disability is a key priority for my term as Disability Discrimination Commissioner, and for my sins on the drafting committee at the United Nations negotiating the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. I facilitated and wrote Article 24. Don't beat up on me too much. So education is recognised as a cornerstone of social inclusion. It has significant influence on shaping how we view and understand society. It plays an important role in social development and interaction. Often the avenue for lifelong friendships and support networks. Education builds resilience to and pathways out of poverty and disadvantage, and it also provides people with the means of gaining the knowledge and skills necessary for employment in an open labour market, the civic participation and social cohesion, and to effect social change. The right to education is a central pillar of economic, social and cultural rights enshrined in international human rights law, but equal access to education and the opportunity for lifelong learning is a fundamental human right consistently denied people with disability. Many children and adults with disability continue to receive no education, and for many more, education is available only in settings where people with disability are segregated from their peers and where the education they receive is of an inferior quality. The exclusion and segregation of children and adults with disability from education affirms and reinforces the view in society that people with disability are inherently different, with individual deficits in bodily, cognitive, and mental attributes that are perceived to be required for a normal human being. This view results in societal responses to people with disability that legitimise segregation and special structures and systems and the denial of personal autonomy. It affirms and reinforces ableism. There are also well-established infrastructure, funding, and vested and professional interests in education and employment systems that stifle reform and underpin resistance against desegregation. These systems have significant power to influence decision-making, and the status and existing financial arrangements are privileged over the rights of people with disability. Ableism, vested interests, and segregated education and employment are not just issues for Australia, but are a global phenomenon. The United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, the CRPD, refutes ableism and the segregation of people with disability in society, including in education and employment. The CRPD reaffirms people with disability as rights bearers and subjects of human rights on an equal basis with others. In terms of education, the CRPD requires governments to ensure an inclusive education system at all levels, as well as lifelong learning. Inclusion involves a process of systemic reform embodying changes and modifications in content, teaching methods, approaches, structures, and strategies in education to create an education system that provides all students with an equitable and participatory learning experience. An inclusive education system provides the necessary infrastructure and supports for people with disabilities to ensure a quality of education, as opposed to people with disability accommodating the education system by travelling to centralised separate facilities or being placed in separate units within mainstream schools, segregating them from siblings and non-disabled peers. It's that moment when you realise you're the noisy person in the crowd. Does that work? Does that pick it up? Sorry about that, folks. How's that? Is that picking it up? Right. Back to my erudite ways. Inclusive education plays a vital role in ensuring people with disability are able to exercise their right to work and employment. Recognising that segregated employment settings are inconsistent with the right to work. Quality, inclusive education prepares people with disability for work and employment through the acquisition of knowledge, skills, and confidence necessary for participation in the open labour market. It is important to ensure that pathways to open labour markets are promoted for people with disability, and that people with disability are not channeled into segregated settings of work. Lifelong education is a key component to ensuring and fostering the continued career development for people with disability. If done successfully, inclusive education has a transformative role, beginning in the formative years of preschool and school education. It enables all children to contribute to regular school and classroom learning activities and events. All children are supported to make friends and to be socially successful with their peers. Diversity is recognised, respected, understood, and celebrated in the classroom and in the school. Modes of instruction are varied to meet the needs of all. Quiet and sensory spaces can be used by all students as needed. Learning in sign language, the use of alternative scripts such as Braille, augmentative and alternative modes, means and formats of communication are available to all students. The importance of inclusive education being done effectively cannot be underestimated. Done well, it demonstrates capability and achievement seamlessly. Done poorly, it can reinforce negative assumptions. By the time students finish their education and commence their working life, their friends and peer networks will reflect the diversity of the human experience. They will imagine and expect to work in places that are gender, age, cultural, race, religion, and disability diverse, as their school was. It will leave them with an incomprehensible view of today's unemployment statistics for people with disability. Finally, ableism and the deficit view of disability is diminished by the knowledge and experience of a life that includes the spectrum of human diversity. Inclusive education has benefits for the whole community. It provides people with skills, knowledge, and experiences that are essential to a diverse and productive pluralist society. It embraces diversity and values difference. In closing, I would like to acknowledge the work of People with Disability Australia and Family Advocacy in convening this forum as a means to turn human rights standards and principles into practical policies, actions, and realities for people with disability. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I don't know about anybody else, but I'm feeling quietly confident around the Human Rights Commissioner's role over the next how many years. So very impressive. Okay, so work experience is such an important rite of passage. I can still remember mine all those years ago. I'm not going to do what you did, Megan, and allude to my age, but it was a while ago. It creates an impression. And just in case you're curious, I mounted police. That was an interesting one, riding at the time. So it's important. It very much forms, shapes who you are as a young adult, providing a stepping stone for a lot of young people, turning work from a concept to a practice, getting a taste of what it looks like, what it feels like, what the expectations are like, even if you never go near that workplace again. And maybe that's the point. I'd now like to play a short video highlighting a positive example of what a good work experience can look like, showcasing a young woman, Rhiannon Samuels-Connell, and how this can be set up as a pathway to future employment of work.
My name's Di. I'm the mother of Rhiannon, who's the youngest of my 4 children. Rhiannon's in year 11 this year. We've had a vision for Rhiannon from when she was very young. She was only 6 when we first started to really think quite clearly about what we wanted that to look like and to start to write things down. Essentially, it's about her following the same sort of footsteps as her older sister and brothers. We started thinking about Rhiannon doing work experience way before we really came to that time. She was, by the time she got to high school, starting to really have her own ideas about what she thought she might like to do. We went to the bakery just as a customer one day, and Rhiannon saw one of her classmates, schoolmates, working behind the counter. And when we went out, she said, "Oh, I want to work there." So, and because we actually did know the people who own the business, it was thinking, well, you know, that's something that we might broach.
My name's Ruth Hamilton. I'm one of the owners of Wild Rise. We're a bakery, roastery situated in Pambula. I've known Rhiannon pretty much all of her life. When Di asked me about the work experience, I was pretty excited. We went in and took some photos, and then when we got closer to the work experience, we used them in a whole lot of ways. So, so some of that was thinking about some of the tasks that Rhiannon would be doing and thinking about how she was going to navigate those things. Thinking about some of the things that would be tricky and thinking about some of the safety issues. On work experience day, she had her uniform. She was very excited. She knew what she was going to be expecting to a point. She had her support in place who, you know, support worker knows her well. She's comfortable with her. Support worker really knew what her role was going to be because we'd done a lot of planning together, you know, prior to that. So yeah, Rhiannon was ready. Early starts are tricky, and that we have to be really super organised for that at this stage. Rhiannon's a creature of routine, so it's a hard thing when you have to get out the house. But what we saw was that Rhiannon was really clear about the work ethics, that it was important, and so she strived. You know, even though it was hard for her, she strived really well to make sure that she did arrive at work on time. I think it's really important that you know, even though it was just an experience, she was doing jobs that we needed doing. So there was value to that. I would say embrace it. It's an opportunity for you as an employer to learn as much as it is for your work experience person.
Another thing that's come from the work experience is that Rhiannon's starting to be really clear about achieving credentials. So there was a work experience certificate that all the kids got, really nicely produced one, and so she felt really proud of that. Ultimately, what we hope, and Rhiannon will hope, is to have some engaged employment in the community down the track, in open employment. My advice to parents when it comes to work experience is if your child has older siblings, then capitalise on that and keep talking and planting the seeds around what is possible with your young person. So think about what their interests and passions are. Look around your community and see where there are places that could open doors.
I think before I invite our next speaker up, I think just wanted to highlight a few key insights, I think, watching this, and the intentional effort by all, including Rhiannon, around to actually make sure that this was a valuable experience and not a tokenistic piece, which is just a really positive way to lead this sort of process. The right ingredients are also supporting Rhiannon to drive what this needed to look like, to take the lead. And the third being what strikes me, and I don't know how many times I've seen this video, is the power of imitation. And so for this young student, seeing one of her peers that she attended regular class in that workplace and then wanting to aspire to actually try that. The power of imitation. A normative approach across many local schools in New South Wales, that peer-to-peer learning, the expectation of work. A byproduct most definitely more likely to occur in the regular class. I now have the pleasure to introduce Rhiannon Samuels-Connells, who will be sharing for the forum her insights about this experience and work generally.
What am I doing? What am I doing?
Yeah, so don't worry about the slides. They'll control the slides. You just worry about that.
What am I doing? Whenever I go out, I'm so nervous.
Rhiannon, over here where you've got your notes there.
Okay.
You're doing good. You're doing good.
What will I talk about?
Yeah.
I don't
Good
do this.
afternoon.
I can. Give me 1 minute.
Rhiannon's a little bit nervous
Very.
understandably, and we were talking prior to
you.
this saying, gee, I'm really nervous as well. So the two of us had a bit of a
Oh,
chat
really?
about that. And so you've got all of this in front of you that you can
Okay.
and just start here.
Thank you.
That's
Here.
all right. Do you want me to go
Me.
back up?
I can. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share my experiences with you today. As you can see in this slide, I have had lots of opportunities since I was a Year 10 student. I'm proud of what I have achieved along this pathway. Over the last few years, I've matured, learnt more about myself, and discovered I'm good at customer service. People also tell me I have a great attention to detail. I strive to do well at everything I try. I've also discovered what I do and don't like. When I was doing my work placement at the RSL, I loved serving lunches. When I worked in a cafe, I enjoyed going to the supermarket in the mornings to buy food supplies for the day. During my traineeship, I was responsible for sorting and filing a lot of store dockets. I didn't really like doing dusting, cleaning, or facing up, which is the straightening up of stock in the store. This is all helping me work out eventually what my dream job to be. I like working as a team and making new friends. I'm planning to catch up with a past co-worker from R10 for lunch in a few weeks. I am especially like earning money. When I first got paid, I would regularly call in and buy a chai latte from a bakery on my walk to work. I enjoy being able to afford a gym membership where I do dance classes. Yeah, I like going to the local pubs and clubs to eat. I just recently treated myself to a holiday to visit a friend at Parasite and it's smooth for the first time. I also used some of my savings to pay to study for RSA, which is the responsible service of alcohol course at TAFE. At this stage of my life, I'm wanting to get a hospitality job where I can use the RSA credential I achieved. I'm planning to move out of home next year. I know I will need a good income coming into my budget so I can afford all my bills. Thank you. And for that, I think I done myself.
Thanks, Rhiannon. Well
Is
done.
that what it sound like?
They're recording what you're saying.
Wow.
So thank you so much. And I clearly was in the way right at the beginning, so apologies for that, Rhiannon. Lesson learnt. I'd now like to just show another quick video, Josh's story, another young person who through the support of families made good use of employment pathways whilst he was at school and to secure employment post-school.
Josh is a 20-year-old man. He is really easygoing, fun-loving. His interests are trucks. He loves his trucks. He loves music. Country music's his favourite.
I come over in the morning, I pick up Josh. We go around to businesses. They all know who Josh is. And they all know what he's doing and they know what he's achieving. It means that Josh is just living a normal life. He gets up and goes to work every day, but just like everyone else does.
When Josh was about 4 years old, it was time for us to look into school. So we took ourselves off to a family advocacy workshop in Newcastle. And there was a guest speaker by the name of Wendy Strove. And she was so inspiring. And she told us her story about her son and the possibilities and opportunities that were given to him. through mainstream education in a regular classroom. We went around all our local primary schools and we found one who was on board with our vision for Joshua. So we enrolled Joshua in a regular class. He was invited to all the birthday parties. He went on excursions. He did everything the other kids did. And he had a beautiful, positive experience from kindergarten right through to year 5 until we moved to Bathurst. We actually enrolled Joshua in a special school when we first moved here, and it was just not in our vision of Josh's future. So we actually then enrolled him in our local high school, where he started year 7.
Kelso High campus has a diverse student population, and I think we are a reflection of society, and we basically aim to cater for the needs of every student, whatever those needs are. Josh Shearman was one of the students here. He accessed mainstream curriculum with support. It was actually the partnership between the family and the school that made the difference. And Josh's mum was really clear about what she wanted for Josh and made that really clear to us. So when we were developing our individual education plan for Josh, we had a really good picture of what the family wanted. We had a good picture of what Josh needed.
A lot of my time I spent with Josh, supporting him in classes, mainstream classes, going out to his work experience. Spent a lot of time with him. The main reason why we were in mainstream classes so he could get those social skills and interact with other students. He wasn't just categorised, he was out there making friendships and really building on those friendships throughout his whole school life.
When our students leave Kelso High, part of the transition process is preparation for life after school, and we have that process for all our students. And in Josh's case, that meant some assisted work experience with a couple of local businesses.
Josh first started here as a work experience student for Kelso High School here in Bathurst, and that was 1 hour a week, one day, once a week. That has now progressed on to volunteer work. So he still comes to the store once a week for 1 hour and helps us with our duties in the store by doing various tasks.
Our vision around work experience for Josh was to start to think about what life was going to look like beyond school. So we wanted to create some relationships within the community for Josh to get some skills up that he would maybe potentially use after school.
We've known Josh for approximately 5 years, I guess. We've known him through his mum and dad, Chris and Vanessa, and they approached us for Josh to do some work experience with us here at Kelso Truck Tyres.
We're a customer-orientated business, and with Josh's autism, we weren't quite sure how that was going to impact our business. He's been a great fit, and he still does volunteer work for us at the moment.
So the independence that he's shown has evolved over time, and now it's basically just a matter of handing him something and he knows where to find that and can complete the task basically independently.
Since leaving school, Josh has his own business called JLS Mailing. This involves Joshua going to the post office and collecting businesses' mail and then delivering the mail, and he picks up the outgoing mail and posts it at the end of the day.
Chris and Vanessa, Josh's parents, approached Michael and myself about an idea for a proposed business for Josh once he'd left school. 12 months prior to him commencing his business, he'd come in and practice the footsteps, I suppose you'd call it, and the processes involved. To this day, Josh still delivers our mail. We can see it's a meaningful business for him and he's getting a lot out of it, and so are we.
JLS Mailing has 14 businesses on board. It has its own website, Instagram page and Facebook page, and it's been built on word of mouth.
When I come around in the morning, I wear my uniform, and he always looks at his badge and he understands that he's leaving the house to go do his mailing. Josh has just built that relationship around town with his businesses because he is seen every day. He sees these people. He gains relationships around town with other businesses, and he becomes a member of our community.
How are you today?
So Josh was given the opportunity to come and present today, and being so far away and other commitments, he wasn't able to attend. I have to say, Josh and his family had to navigate a lot of stereotypes and attitudes to actually even look at work experience, and luckily they got that lucky dip piece happening with the school. They built good relationships and they were able to utilise those relationships to pursue, in that particular case, initially with work experience, Josh's interest in trucks. A really good example, I think, around how when the expectations are set and there's intentional planning that occurs. And I actually remember attending the launch of that video, that was one of our videos, and in Bathurst a number of years ago, and it was overwhelming. Most of the guests at that launch were local business owners and clients of Josh. And there was a really strong sentiment that they wanted to be involved, that he provided a service that they needed and valued, and they wanted to be a part of that process. Okay, it's important to mention again that the positive stories heard today in the utilisation of employment pathways have not happened by accident or happened without the intervention of young people and their families. They've also not been left to rely on the process within schools. Our aim is that if left to schools, young people and their families can feel assured that good outcomes will be accomplished and that no groups of people will be left behind. PWDA and Family Advocacy have developed a briefing note for this parliamentary forum, and to guide our parliamentarians and other decision makers through what we believe will assist government to start to take the necessary steps to solve some of these complex issues across our education system. All participants in the room as well as online have access to this briefing document, which outlines key recommendations, many of which have already been identified in one or all of the 4 reports released in the last 12 months. I have to do that again, 4 reports. I would like to highlight a few of these recommendations now, just briefly. The first being the adoption of the Convention on the Rights for Persons with Disability compliant definition of inclusive education, highlighting practices and settings, and applied across all New South Wales public schools. This is also a finding in the recent New South Wales Legislative Council inquiry, education inquiry, as well as other report findings, with a solution-based approach to this involving bringing together a working group with key personnel within the New South Wales Department of Education and relevant stakeholders, including people with disabilities, to draft this definition. It is evident we need to be clear on what constitutes inclusive education. We also need to be clear on practice, with a national roadmap on inclusive education also being worked through at the national level, having an implication on our New South Wales system. We need to be clear in New South Wales. We've also put forward the recommendation of further investment in careers and transition planning, with any work done on this falling drastically short of what's required to change the dial. Again, the data doesn't lie. Our recommendations calling for an investment in a transition pilot project to improve transition of young people with disability from education to employment, using existing employment pathways such as work experience and post-school transition planning, utilising the discovery process of the customised employment model. This model, referred to on a number of occasions in the DRC recommendations as an essential investment to improve the employment outcomes for all people with disability, and particularly people who experience significant barriers to employment, many of which are currently considered, as we discussed earlier, unemployable within the New South Wales education system. The discovery process is not occurring in New South Wales schools currently, with this pilot ensuring the appropriate training and resources to equip schools to overcome issues of low expectations and stereotypes impacting employment possibilities and pathways. The third rec I'd like to mention is the complaints process. We are calling for government to develop a robust independent complaint system that sits outside our education system and to be developed as a matter of urgency. Again, this is highlighted in several reports. This is a critical reform piece, and for many of the advocates in the room, we've been banging on about this for years. The last recommendation I'd like to highlight is the improvement of post-school internships and employment opportunities in the New South Wales Public Service. The employment of people with disability within public service is essential in any New South Wales-centric employment reform. And both PWDA and Family Advocacy take the position that it's not enough to say, let's improve the numbers. To support this in actual terms, we recommend the use of the customised employment model, and that this model be adopted and utilised within the New South Wales Public Service to support employment of people with disabilities who experience significant barriers to employment, with training provided to key personnel across government departments on the customised employment approach. This approach, for those unfamiliar, is very different to traditional employment practices. It's not about adjustments. It's not about customisation. It's an actual model. It's a framework that has different stages that need to be considered and applied. It's a job designed specifically for the person, whereby the needs and the interests of the person and the needs of the business are both met. It's aimed to design a win-win for both the employee and the employer, where minimal wage and above are applied. Investment in our local members of parliament is an essential step in the level of change sought and from across the different political parties and independent members. In this respect, we are pleased to call on the following politicians to hear more on how they intend to support the required reform across New South Wales schools and within the public service. It is important to acknowledge that some key political representatives are missing today. However, we feel confident that an opportunity to discuss our recommendations will be provided. I now have the pleasure of introducing Ms. Leishal Tesh, Parliamentary Secretary for Families and Communities and Parliamentary Secretary for Disability Inclusion. The same as don't get the light. Yeah. What we'll do, we'll push over this side and then we'll bring it.
And then Rosemary will come and snatch my notes away. Oh no, this is fine now. This is working, isn't it? Thank you. Thank you so much, Daniel. I too would like to acknowledge that we're on Aboriginal land. I live on beautiful Darkinjung country on the Central Coast. If anyone ever feels like coming up and spending any money in my community, bring it on. No, this land is and always will be Aboriginal land, and I acknowledge any Aboriginal people in the room, and also thank everybody in the room who works with Aboriginal people with disability who live with another level of disadvantage more often than not. So thank you very much for the work that you do there. I apologise today for the Minister, Kate Washington. She's home with COVID at the moment. So I will pass on, and I've got one of Kate's chiefs of staff with me today to pass on the information that we've shared. So thank you very much, Ray, for joining us. Also, yeah, sorry, a promotion to Ray. No, Ray's fabulous, and he's a great part of the team. So it really is a privilege, I think, to come into the Parliament as the wheelchair user and what am I called? The Parliamentary Secretary for Disability Inclusion. People have pushed me to become the Minister, but I actually think it's my responsibility on behalf of the people with disabilities in New South Wales to not be the Minister, but make sure that every single department has got an inclusive lens that they look through and deliver. I am absolutely passionate about employment as a former teacher. a former teacher who realised that as a wheelchair user and a Paralympian, I sort of had a voice for people with disabilities, and I did part of my master's in education so I could get a better understanding of the voices of people with intellectual disabilities, and taught in a very inclusive unit in our school where I pushed kids out of the unit into my mainstream classes, and I still continue to push for kids across the Central Coast to be not in segregated units but in mainstream classes where possible. I also thank you for your voices about customised employment. I hear you and I see what is going on is absolutely fantastic. And I'd like to actually reach out and to the principal of Kelso High School if he's still there. I think what's occurred there is absolutely important, and I think it's hugely important that our educators see these role models. And part of our journey as government is listening to the community groups. We had a very good relationship with Cerebral Palsy Alliance, and a group of students with cerebral palsy said, hey, we need to make improvements across the education department. And one of our commitments is to make sure that our, what are they called? Assessments are inclusive in every step of the way. So kids within schools with disabilities have got better pathways within schools. Cerebral Palsy Alliance also said, hey, we want to see pathways for people with disabilities into teaching. And my thing is, if you don't see it, you can't be it. So there's definitely work there happening, especially with role models who are all already working in the public sector and in the department to make sure we've got pathways for people with disabilities there. So I've written some terrible indecipherable notes. It's also, I think, another big commitment we made in the lead up to the election was working with Get Skilled Access. So Dylan Alcott, whilst the organisation is not from New South Wales, Get Skilled Access employs people, a large number of people, primarily people with disabilities. And I think that's been a little bit confronting for some of the able-bodied people in the departments, the government departments across New South Wales, as they've been being taught by people with disabilities to change their practices and make the practice of government departments so much more inclusive. And I'd like to acknowledge my parliamentary colleagues in the room. Abigail Boyd, thank you for coordinating here, and Honourable Natasha McLaren-Jones, and any other parliamentarians in the room. And I understand some people have come and gone. It's really important that we see the level of employment change. Under the previous government, we saw the level of employment in the public sector almost half. And to me, that breaks my heart, and we've got a hell of a lot of work to do. So Get Skilled Access, looking at 4 main components, and one of them is employment. One of them is in education, so working in schools to make sure that teachers have got a better understanding about inclusive delivery, but also working with students and make sure that the mainstream students and students have got a less discriminatory journey in their education at school. Yeah, another part of our work with Get Skilled Access is to make sure that in the health sector that people with disabilities are treated better than they're treated at the moment. A hugely important component. We want to have equal access to health and equal understanding in health. And another component we're looking at is tourism. So I think part of it is saving up to be able to move out of home. Part of it is participating in the broader community. So tourism is a super important component. But, and Sarah Mitchell, I'd like to acknowledge my parliamentary colleague, Sarah Mitchell. Thank you. And then the employment component is hugely important. In Transport for New South Wales, we've got a great program employing people with a stepping stone in, people who live in neurodivergency, who are then stepping stoning into other parts of the transport department. I'd like to give you the example of my lovely student who I taught as a geography student, lives with autism. Stephen was in my Year 10 class, who's part of Young Labour. He taught me to door knock, and now he then is working in Transport for New South Wales, and he's teaching me about road safety and working on road safety across New South Wales. So it's great to see that's actually a working example. Another thing we're doing is the Auslan syllabus. So I think we've introduced a K to 10 Auslan syllabus to expand the number of people who actually we can use as interpreters across New South Wales, and the voice of, there we go. And we're also looking at DCJs. We've got our We're working closely with the Council for Intellectual Disabilities to make sure we've got pathways for people with intellectual disabilities into DCJs, but also into the public sector. And alongside that, DCJs are doing a pretty amazing piece of work, making sure that government information is also available in the easy read format. So we actually can have access and pathways in there. I think in summary, we want to make sure that customised employment, that employment is part of our journey. It's really lonely being in here as the only wheelchair user in the New South Wales Parliament. And the Parliament, when I arrived here, was not accessible at all, and it's still a work in progress. So I apologise to some of you who may have challenges getting into the Parliament. We're working on that as well. The sunflower lanyard is out there for the broader use, but there's lots of stepping stones along the way. So I think in summary, I say I really, really appreciate the work of the PWDA, and Family Advocacy for your incredible work that you're doing, advocating beside us for a better New South Wales for all of us. It's really important, and it's fabulous to be joined by so many people with disabilities in the room. This is a journey we're on. Things have changed significantly. We've been in the government for 18 months. It's definitely not about numbers. It's about every single step of the way to make sure that the pathways for people with disabilities in education and the pathways from people with disabilities out of education into employment are real and possible. So thank you all so much for joining us in the New South Wales Parliament, and apologies, I do have to duck off. And just quietly though, I just need to do a shout out for my hero, Rosemary. Thank you so much for the work you do. You're just such a fabulous role model for all of us. We really respect, admire, and are so grateful for your work. Thank you.
Thank you, Liesl. And we look forward to following up with you about our recommendations in the briefing note in the coming days. I'd now like to introduce the Honourable Natasha McLaren-Jones.
Thank you very much. I too would like to acknowledge my colleagues here and everyone here, but more importantly, to thank People with Disability Australia and also Family Advocacy, not only for the support that you provide for people with disability and their families, but most importantly, the advocacy work that you do. Although we're here to talk about predominantly education and support of young people with disability and transitioning from education to employment and the importance of employment, I do want to acknowledge the significant work that you do across all levels of government and in the community, putting forward submissions and preparing reports. And the work that you've done in this briefing note and putting together this forum today is key, because it is about getting that message out and talking to as many people and raising awareness. We all know how important employment is for everyone, but what is quite confronting is the fact, and the statistics have come out that show that around 48% of people with disability are employed, compared to 80% of people without a disability. And then when you delve into that detail further, you find that people with disability are less likely to be employed full-time and are paid less. But these are the statistics we need to talk about. These are statistics we need to raise, which is why inquiries, and I want to acknowledge Abigail Boyd, who chaired recently the inquiry which you referred to earlier. There were a number of recommendations, around 38. I know Abigail will touch on these, and they range from things about gathering data to raising that awareness, providing that support, implementing that pilot that we talked about. These are the things that need to be done. A lot has occurred, and I want to acknowledge my colleague Sarah Mitchell, who's a former Minister for Education. In our government, we implemented a number of changes. We implemented the Disability Inclusion Act. We were the first state to implement the NDIS, but these were all just starts, and there is more to do to ensure that people with disability have the same opportunities, but most importantly, are able to get the jobs that they want, transition from schools, are supported in schools. I think some of the stories we heard in the inquiry. Some were great about some fantastic schools, mainstream schools, special schools that provided that unique support around the needs of individual students. We also heard terrible stories from families and individuals about how they were disenfranchised from education, suspensions. These are all the things that we need to address. We need to ensure that every young person has those opportunities to get a job, to have the independence, to make the decisions, whether it is to save, to have a holiday, to go away with friends, to move out and live independently, as Rhiannon talked about earlier. And that is what this forum is about today, is to continue the conversation. And I thank you again for everything that you're doing to raise that awareness. And we will continue to work alongside you to ensure that that support is provided as well. So thank you.
Thanks very much, Natasha, for your insights. I'd now like to welcome the Honourable Sarah Mitchell, who's the Shadow Minister for Education and Early Learning.
Thanks, Cecilia. It's a bit like speed dating. Which politician's up next? Now you've got me. I also just want to acknowledge everybody who is here in the room today, and welcome to Parliament for those of you who haven't been here before. It's lovely to have you. Also a big thank you to Family Advocacy and People with Disability Australia. And I don't want to speak for long. I just wanted to say that I think it's really testament to the work that you do, the fact that you filled this seminar out very quickly, and you had a lot of people wanting to be here and be a part of the discussion, but you've also got representatives from politicians of all sides of Parliament, and that doesn't happen with every group and with every issue. So acknowledging that it's not just a bipartisan support for your organisations, it's multi-partisan when we all come and we want to work with you collaboratively and genuinely. I will say, particularly in relation to family advocacy, when I was Education Minister, we met often. You were frank and fearless in your advice to me. You continued to be in that role now that I'm the Shadow Minister. And I appreciate that, because I think it's really important that we, as policy leaders, can talk to you about what's happening in terms of your community and what you need. And for me particularly, I think this forum looking at education and employment and how that all comes together is really important. Natasha mentioned the committee which Abigail chairs, which I'm also on. You know, we heard those real experiences about people who don't get the best opportunities while they're at school, and the impacts that has on them for later in life, those who live with disability. And so I think anything that we can do in a bipartisan way and multi-partisan way to support people living with disability, how we can be advocates for you, is really important. Governments don't always get it right. We didn't get everything right when we were in government. I hate to tell Labor, but they won't get everything right all the time either. Sometimes there are complex issues that take time to work through, but the important thing is about turning up and listening. And I think what you guys do particularly well is you come with solutions. I mean, even the fact that today, before we came here, we've got a briefing paper, we've got recommendations, we've got tangible things that we can be looking at as a parliament. That's so important, because it's about working together on solutions. So thank you for the opportunity to be here. I continue to be very passionate about education, early childhood education, the opportunities that it gives. I don't want to go into it, but I remain very concerned about the statistics, particularly around suspension and expulsion and the overrepresentation of young people with disability in those figures. And I want to continue working with those in the room on those sort of issues, as well as the Shadow Minister. But for today, thank you for the opportunity. Like others, I will have to duck out shortly, but please don't take that as any indication that we're not fully supportive of you. We absolutely are. And it's great that so many people are here today to be a part of this discussion. So, thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I think the sensibleness around across politics makes a lot of sense for the changes that we're talking about. I'd now like to introduce, we've got a short clip from Alexander Greenwich, who couldn't be here today but wanted to say a few words.
Hi folks, sorry I couldn't be with you here in person today at the important event Securing Prosperous Future, the vital link between inclusive education and employment. At the outset, I really want to thank Family Advocacy for the important work they are doing, and recommit to them that I'll keep on working with them to ensure we improve inclusive education and employment in New South Wales, and that our approach is consistent with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with a Disability. As we know, the Auditor General has recently confirmed that there is critical work that we need to do, particularly with the Department of Education when it comes to making sure our schools provide inclusive education for everybody, including young people with a disability. I look forward to the government's response to the recent Legislative Council inquiry into this, and hope that we can improve the educational settings for young people with a disability in New South Wales. Before I was in politics, I was actually in recruitment and human resource management, and I know the importance of inclusive workplaces. We have a lot of work to do in New South Wales, and we need to make sure we are supporting models which encourage young people with a disability into employment. And I fully support the discovery process from the Customised Employment model as a way to ensure successful work experience. I'll also be encouraging investment from the government in this project. I want to let everybody know that you are supported. The work you are doing is valued and it is critically important. And because of your work and the growing support, we know that New South Wales will soon hopefully become a much fairer place for young people with a disability.
You can't hear me, Alex, but thank you. Finally, I would like to introduce Abigail Boyd, Chair of the Parliamentary Education Committee.
Thank you very much. Hello, thank you so much for being here with us on Gadigal land. I pay my respects to elders past and present. This land is, was and always will be Aboriginal land. And whenever I stand here in Parliament, I'm always reminded of just how powerful this Parliament is, because you only need to look at the laws that have been passed and the way that they have disproportionately impacted on First Nations people to see just how important our laws are. And in the same way, we can't just talk. We do have power in this place, and I agree with my colleagues, and I acknowledge them all, that we have great cross-party support and goodwill when it comes to trying to do the right thing in lots of areas, including in relation to people with disability. But without strong legislative will, we're not exercising the power that we have to really make a difference. So I am an autistic person. I have two autistic children, and they had the privilege of being able to go through a school system that was able to really, focus on their needs and include them. They got to that point simply because I had the financial resources to get them into a place that I wanted to get them into, and where I felt that they would get to thrive and be their best selves. And I was keenly aware when I was doing that, that is not something that is available to most people, and that is a travesty, because when you look at what inclusion means and the way it can turn around people's lives, that should be available for everybody. And so that's one of the reasons that I initiated the helped initiate the inquiry with my colleagues in relation to inclusive education in New South Wales's educational settings. I don't need to tell you, the recommendations are very similar to what we had coming out of the Disability Royal Commission. They're very similar to what people in the disability community have been telling us for decades and decades. We know what needs to be done. And we also know very clearly the link between inclusive education and inclusive employment. This idea that somehow you could go to school in, and I will call it segregated, in what in many cases is a segregated setting, and then suddenly come out the other side having had no experience with people with disability, to then be champions for an inclusive workplace is a little bit fanciful. So of course we need inclusive education if we're then going to have an inclusive society all round. And so why did we do the inquiry if we already sort of knew what the results would be? Because if we don't do that, then we don't, unfortunately, have the ability to platform people's voices, to get that lived experience, and to be able to impress upon politicians and the rest of community and media as to why we need to actually implement those recommendations and do all the things that you've been telling us for a long, long time to do. So I'm speeding through because I've only got 3 minutes, but I just, thank you. I just wanted to reflect on one moment in the inquiry. And I think that I think all of us changed our minds slightly as we went through. And, you know, as we had all of those hearings, particularly the private roundtables that we held with children with disability and also adults who had been through the system recently, I think all of us learnt something and slightly sort of changed the way that we felt about the issues in front of us. And that is the power of lived experience. And one particular story really sat with me. So this was a private briefing. So I won't obviously identify the person who was talking with us. But he was talking about the shame he felt from having been excluded as a boy from school. And he talked about the things that would set him off or trigger him, which then would lead to whole schools being evacuated so that people could be kept safe from him. And the feelings that that left him as somebody who didn't think that he was, you know, doing anything wrong. He didn't think he was a dangerous person. That feeling, that lifelong feeling of shame and exclusion, simply because the people who were responsible for his education didn't understand him. And he talked about how some teachers really got him, and when they understood him, he was fine. But that this legacy, and I think that use of shame really got me. And that is what we're dealing with. And when I think when you get those kind of very direct lived experience being shared with people who can make a difference, that's when you begin to see action. And I think that I'm really proud of the report that we wrote, because I think what we got to at the end was so much better than what we would have written when we first started, if we'd come together and not heard from all of those individuals about their experiences. And so that's why we have to do what we do. And that's why I'm so proud to be here, helping to facilitate this forum and to work so closely with family advocacy and with the whole of the disability advocacy community in trying to platform those sorts of stories so that policymakers use the power that we're given here in this parliament to change the laws for the better. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Abigail. And you didn't get the thanks at the beginning of the day, but thank you for helping us set up the hosting the room and whatnot. So where to from here? People with disabilities and family advocacy hope to work with government on adopting the recommendations in the briefing note. And we will endeavour to keep the communities connected to both of our organisations, informed of how this progresses and how potentially they can be involved. I mentioned earlier the School to Work project, an important project supporting young people and their families to pursue employment and from an early age. The work undertaken is undertaken in Family Advocacy's initiative, Resourcing Inclusive Communities, our capacity building arm, focusing on connecting young people and families from the beginning of high school, as research informs us that starting young is essential for this group. With this project currently funded through ILC funding and delivered in partnership with organisations in the ACT and Queensland. On your seats, you'll find one of multiple resources developed across this project to address the attitudinal issues concerning employment and to highlight a solution-based approach that supports jobs and careers for young people with disabilities. This is one of many. So we encourage you to reach out to us in the first instance around connecting with resources and videos and other things that we've developed to try and help shift some of these ableist attitudes that are impacting many, many young people across the state. Now I'd like to welcome Megan to do some final remarks on behalf of People with Disabilities Australia.
It's going to take me a moment. It's just the fun of Okay, thank you. Hi, everyone. Apologies, it does take me a little bit. So I think the biggest thing that we have to recognise today, and the biggest thing that we need to acknowledge today, is that inclusive and disability affirming education and employment is at core about choice. We need to make sure that we are giving space for everyone to choose their form of desegregation, how they engage in the community. Don't assume that people with disability can't, but also don't assume we can. Just ask us. Just ask us what it is we want and how we want it. That's what I've heard all day. Make sure that what you do is creating society, education and employment that allows us to be who we need to be and who we choose to be within our communities. We need to improve the environment. We need to create opportunities for people to choose the work that is viable for us and know that we can choose that. And engage in a way that will make your organisations more flexible and definitively more innovative, because we know that is something that we bring every single day. We need you as our leaders to move with us on this journey and to ensure we can choose to lead when we have the energy to do so. Today, I was actually reminded of the multiple moments in primary school and in high school where I was reminded that being disabled meant I'm broken, that I can't, that I shouldn't, and that I shouldn't choose hard pathways. I'm lucky. I'm very, very privileged. I had a lot of choice, and I had parents who made sure that that choice was something that was just inevitably something that I could do, and I was allowed to tell people to do things that involve swear words that I won't say right now. But I guess the most important thing is that we have to recognise that employment doesn't look the same for everyone, and it shouldn't have to. The more flexible and the more customised we make our employment opportunities, the better it is for everyone. And, you know, let's take on the curb cut effect when it comes to employment and when it comes to education. And lastly, as an autistic ADHDer with PTSD and OSDD and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, I want to recognise that disability made me who I am today, because I would not have the career or the choices that I had if I wasn't a person with disability. And so I'm absolutely grateful and proud of being a person with disability. And today has reminded me why I'm so proud. Thanks.
Right.
Yeah, just the standards.
Thanks very much, Megan. A powerful way to end today. And I want to stop and pause and thank everybody that attended today in person, and of course, everybody that's here online. This will be recorded, and something tells me we'll be sending out pieces of this, if not the whole parliamentary forum out wider. We'd like to thank all the presentations. We'd like to thank all the politicians that we heard from today. We'd particularly like to thank Commissioner Caius and Rhiannon for your presentation today. I'd also like to say that at the end, we've got a bit of a light supper. A light supper, is it too early for supper? An early afternoon or a late afternoon snack. So please, we ask everybody if you could hang around and we could have a chat and catch up on what's gone on today and what we could potentially do in the future. I want to end from Family Advocacy's perspective to say again that it's been a privilege working alongside People with Disabilities Australia. And we hope that in the future with a joint consensus around how we can progress what really does need to occur in New South Wales in more of a strong way. And we look forward to pursuing that. So, and I will get into a lot of trouble if I do not say that we will need a photo for people that are willing to be a part of that. And what that will involve is, if you don't choose to be a part of being in the photo, which is absolutely fine, there's the potential of doing this, or removing yourself from the photo altogether. And lastly, I'd really like to say a big thank you to Leanne and Julian. They were the two heroes behind the scenes in planning this event, in putting up with people like myself and Megan and everyone else in the meantime. So a big thank you to Leanne and Julian. Cross-organisational working together, I love it. I'd also like to thank our interpreters, and they've done a terrific job. So thanks very much. And of course, Daniel, your fantastic welcome to country. I'm still stunned by that. So we'll be in contact. All right. So thank you, everybody. And we look forward to continuing these conversations. Thank you.